This is story number 2 about Pippi Longstocking. This story is called Pippi is a Thing Finder and Gets into a Fight. Annika woke up early the next morning and she jumped out of bed and ran over to Tommy. "Wake up, Tommy," she cried, pulling him by the arm. "Wake up and let's go and see that funny girl with the big shoes." Tommy was wide awake in an instant. "I knew, even while I was sleeping, that something exciting was going to happen today, but I didn't remember what it was," he said as he yanked off his pajama jacket. Off they went to the bathroom, washed themselves and brushed their teeth much faster than usual, had their clothes on in a twinkling, and a whole hour before their mother expected them, coming sliding down the banister, and landed at the breakfast table. Down they sat and announced that they wanted their hot chocolate right away. At that very moment. "What's going on? What's going to happen today in such a hurry?" said Mom. "We are going to see the new girl next door," said Tommy. "We may stay there all day," said Annika. That morning Pippi was busy making pepparkakor, or some Swedish cookie. She had made an enormous amount of dough and then rolled it out in the kitchen floor. "Because," said Pippi to her little monkey, "what earthly use is a baking board when one plans to make at least 500 cookies?" And there she lay on the floor, cutting out cookie hearts for dear life. "Stop climbing around in all that dough, Mr. Nilsson," she said crossly, just as the doorbell rang. Pippi ran and opened the door. She was white as a miller on top of a toe, and when she shook her Pippi what am I doing? Pippi ran to the door, and she was white as a miller from top to toe. She'd been covered in flour, and when she shook hands heartily with Tommy and Annika, the whole cloud of flour blew over them. You see, she'd been making the cookies and got all the flour on her face, so she was all white and everywhere, and a big floury dust cloud came everywhere. "So nice that you came over," she said, and shook her apron, so there came another cloud of flour. Tommy and Annika got so much in their throats that they could not stop coughing. "What are you doing?" asked Tommy. "Well, if I say that I'm sweeping the chimney, you wouldn't believe me, so you're clever," said Pippi. "Fact is, I'm baking. I'm making cookies, but soon I'll be finished. You can sit on the wood box for a while and watch if you like." Pippi could work fast. She could. Tommy and Annika sat and watched how she went through the dough, how she threw the cookies into the cookie pans, and swung the pans into the oven. They thought it was as good as a circus. "Done, all finished," said Pippi at last, and shut the oven door on the last pans with a bang. "What are we going to do now?" asked Tommy. "I don't know what you're going to do," said Pippi, "but I know I can't lie around here and belay and do nothing. I'm a thing finder, and when you're a thing finder, you don't have a minute to spare." "What did you say you are?" asked Annika. "A thing finder? What's that?" asked Tommy. "Somebody who hunts for things, naturally. What else could it be?" "It's somebody who finds things," said Pippi, as she swept all the flour left on the floor into a little pile. "The whole world is full of things, and somebody has to look for them. And that's just what a thing finder does," she said. "What kind of things?" asked Annika. "All kinds of things," said Pippi. "Lumps of gold, ostrich feathers, dead rats and mice, candy, crackers, little biscuits, tiny screws, and things like that." Tommy and Annika thought it sounded as if it would be a fun, and wanted very much to be thing finders too, although Tommy did say he hoped he'd find a lump of gold and not a little tiny screw. We shall see," said Pippa. "One always finds something, but we've got to hurry and get going so the other thing finders don't pick up the lumps of gold around here before we get them." All three thing finders now set out. They decided that it would be best to begin hunting around the houses in the neighborhood because Pippi said that although it could be perfectly well happen that one might find a little screw deep in the woods, still the very best things were usually found where people were living. Though for that matter, she said, I've seen it the other way around too. I remember once when I was out hunting for things in the jungle of Borneo, right in the heart of the forest where no human had ever been before. What do you suppose I found? Why, a very fine wooden leg. I gave it away later to a one-legged man, and he said that wooden leg, like it was to be had for a he said that a wooden leg like that wasn't to be had for love or money. He meant that means it was really the best wooden leg he'd ever had. Tommy and Annika looked at Pippi to see just how a thing finder finds things. Pippi ran from one side of the road to the other, shaded her eyes with a hand, and hunted and hunted. Sometimes she crawled about on her hands and knees, stuck her hands between the pickets of a fence, and then she said in a disappointed tone, "Oh dear, I was sure I saw a lump of gold." "May we really take everything we find?" asked Annika. "Yes, everything is lying on the ground. Everything that's lying on the ground, you can take it," said Pippi. Presently they came to an old man lying asleep on the lawn outside his cottage. "There," said Pippi, "that man is lying on the ground, and we have found him. We'll take him." Tommy and Annika were utterly horrified. No, Pippi, we can't take this old man." "How can we take him?" said Tommy. "Anyway, whatever would we do with him?" "What would we do with him? Oh, there are plenty of things we could do with an old man. We could keep him in a little rabbit hutch inside instead of a rabbit, and feed him on dandelions. But if you don't want to, I don't care. Though it does bother me to think that some other thing finders may come along and take him." It's so funny. They went on. Suddenly, Pippi gave a terrific yell. "Well, I never saw the like of this," she cried as she picked up a large, rusty, old tin can from the grass. "What a find! What a find! Oh, yes! Hey, this is something you can never have too many of." Tommy looked at the can doubtfully. "What can you use that for?" he said. "Oh, you can use it in all sorts of ways," said Pippi. One way is to put cookies into it. Then it becomes a delightful jar with cookies. Another way is not to put cookies in it. Then it becomes a jar without cookies. That certainly isn't quite so delightful, but that's a good idea too." She examined the can and looked at it carefully, which was indeed rusty and had a hole in the bottom. "It looks almost as if it were a jar without cookies," she said thoughtfully. "But you can put it over your head and pretend it's midnight." And that is just what she did. With the can on her head, she wandered around the block like a little metal tower and never stopped until she stumbled over a low wire fence and fell flat on her belly. There was a big crash, and the tin can hit the ground. "Now, see that?" said Pippi, and took off the can. "If I hadn't had this thing on my head, I'd have fallen on my face and hurt myself terribly." "Yes," said Annika, "but if you hadn't had it on your head, then you wouldn't have tripped over the fence, would you, in the first place?" Before she'd even finished speaking, there was another thump. There was another triumphant cry from Pippi, who was holding up an empty spool of thread. "This seems to be my lucky day," she said. "Such a sweet, sweet little spool of thread to blow up soap bubbles with, and to hang around my neck for a necklace. I'll go home and make this one this very minute." However, just at that moment, the gate of one of the cottages nearby, a cottage is like a house, a gate of one of the houses nearby opened, and a boy came rushing out. He looked scared, and that was no wonder, because head over heels after him came 5 other boys. They soon caught him and pushed him against the fence, and all 5 began to hit him in the head. He cried and held his arms in front of his face to protect him. "Give it to me! Give it to me!" cried the oldest, strongest of the boys, "so that he'll never dare show himself on the street again." "Oh," said Annika, "it's Willie they're hitting." Oh, how can they be so mean? I wonder if it's Willie the Wimp. Oh my gosh. It's that awful Bennett. He's so awful in a fight, said Tommy. And 5 against 1. Oh my gosh, that's not fair. Pippi went up to the boys and tapped Bennett on the back. Bennett's the big boy. Tapped Bennett on the back with her forefinger. Hello there, she said. What's the idea? Are you trying to make hash out of little Willie, with 5 of you jumping on him at once? Bennett turned around and saw this little girl he had never seen before, a wild-looking little stranger who dared to touch him. For a while he stood and gasped at her in astonishment. Astonishment is like surprised. Then a broad grin spread over his face. Boys, he said. Boys, let Willie alone and take a look at this girl. What a girl she is. He slapped his knees and laughed, and the instant they had all docked around Pippi, all except Willie, who wiped away his tears and walked very cautiously over to stand beside Tommy. Have you ever seen hair like hers, red as fire, and such shoes? Bennett continued. Can't I borrow one of your shoes? I'd like to go out rowing in a boat, and I haven't a boat. He took hold of one of Pippi's braids, but dropped it instantly and cried, Ouch! I burnt myself. Then all the 5 boys joined hands around Pippi, jumping up and down, screaming, Red head, red head, red head. Pippi stood in the middle of the ring and smiled in the friendliest way. Bennett had hoped she would get mad and begin to cry. At least she ought to have looked scared. When nothing happened, he gave her a push. I don't think you have a very nice way with ladies, said Pippi, and she lifted him in her strong arms high into the air and carried him to a birch tree and hung him over the branch of the tree. Then she looked at the next boy and hung him over another branch, then the next one and set him on the gate outside the cottage, and the next one right over the fence of the cottage, and the next one she threw and he landed in the flowers. The last one of the fighters she put in a tiny toy cart that stood by the road. Then Pippi, Tommy, Annika and Willie stood and looked at the boys for a while. The boys were absolutely speechless and scared. Then Pippi said, You are cowards. You're just wimps. 5 of you attacking one boy, that's cowardly. Then you begin to push a helpless little girl around. Oh, how mean you guys are. Come now, well, we'll go home, said Tommy and Annika. And to Willie, if they try to hurt you again, you come and tell me. And to Bennett, who sat up in the tree and didn't dare to stir, she said, Is there anything else you have to say about my hair or my shoes? If so, you better say it now before I go home. But Bennett had nothing more to say about Pippi's shoes or her hair, so Pippi took a can in one hand and a spool in the other hand and went away, followed by Tommy and Annika. When they were back home in Pippi's garden, Pippi said, Dear me, how awful. Here I found 2 beautiful things, and you didn't get anything. You must hunt a little more. Tommy, why don't you look in the old hollow tree? Old trees are usually the best places for thing finders. Tommy said that he didn't believe he and Annika would ever find anything, but to please Pippi, he put his hand slowly down into the old oak tree. Goodness, he cried, and pulled out his hand. In it he held a little notebook with a leather cover. In a special loop there was a little silver pencil. Well, that's funny, said Tommy. Now see that, said Pippi. There's nothing so nice as being a thing finder. It's a wonder there aren't more people to take it up. There'll be tailors and shoemakers and chimney sweeps and such like, but thing finders, no, indeed, it isn't good enough for them. Thing finders is the best job in the world. And then she said to Annika, Why don't you feel in that old tree stump over there? One always finds things in tree stumps. And Annika stuck her hand down into the tree stump and almost immediately got a hold of a red coral necklace. She and Tommy stood there, open-mouthed, for a long time. They were so amazed and astonished. They thought that hereafter they would be thing finders every single day. Pippi had been up half the night before playing ball, and now she suddenly felt sleepy. "I think I'll have to go and take a nap," she said. "Can't you come with me and tuck me in?" When Pippi was sitting on the edge of her bed, taking off her shoes, she looked at them thoughtfully and said, "He was going out rowing," he said. "That old Bennett," she snorted disdainfully. "I'll teach him to row, indeed. I will, another time." "Say, Pippi," said Tommy respectfully, "why do you wear such big shoes?" "So I can wiggle my toes, of course," she answered. Then she crept into bed. She always slept with her feet on the pillow and her head the other way down under the quilt. "That's the way she sleeps. That's the way they sleep in Guatemala," she announced. "And it's the only real way to sleep. See, like this. I can wiggle my toes when I'm sleeping too." "Can you go to sleep without a lullaby?" she went on. "I always have to sing it myself for a while, otherwise I can't sleep." Tommy and Annika heard a humming sound under the quilt. It was Pippi singing to herself to sleep. Quietly and cautiously they tiptoed out so they would not disturb her. In the doorway they turned to take a last look towards the bed. They could see nothing of Pippi except her feet resting on the pillow. There she lay, wiggling her toes. Tommy and Annika ran home. Annika held the coral necklace tightly in her hand. "That certainly was strange," said Tommy. You don't suppose that Pippi put those things in the place before, did you?" "You never can tell," said Tommy. "You just never can tell anything when it comes to Pippi." The end.